Okay, so I'm just going to start. My name is Terry English. I live in the Czech Republic, but I'm from England. I've lived in the Czech Republic for 20 years, mostly working with young people. I went there for 1 year to teach English to adults, started working with young people, the ministry grew, and 20 years later, I'm still there. And now my work involves training and equipping churches throughout Central and Eastern Europe to work with young people. So that's why I'm stood here today. But one thing I will say is in the past year, I've also been involved in leading a church and doing a lot of other ministries in my own city. So although I still oversee the youth ministry of my church, I've not been working with teenagers on a day-by-day basis for a year. And I say that because youth culture changes a lot in the space of 1 year. I still have teenagers in my house on a monthly basis. I still interact with teenagers a lot. My wife is a high school teacher, so we talk a lot about youth culture. For most people, they would say I have a lot of interaction with young people, but a year ago it was almost every day, and now it's not. So it might be that some of you have more contact with young people than I do these days, and you spot something that I say that is no longer correct. Feel free to tell me. Actually, Terry, that was a year ago. Your information is no longer correct, because we're here to learn from each other. Is that okay? And then my style is very interactive. So what I'm not going to do is speak for 45 minutes and then give half an hour for questions. We'll be talking backwards and forwards as we go. Is that also okay? So I'll also try and keep you awake. This is like the graveyard shift. Right before dinner, I can see already you're like, I need to stay awake, I need to stay awake. So if I'm speaking too fast, please let me know. I'm very passionate about working with young people. And when I speak about things I'm passionate about, I speak too fast. So if you need to slow me down, feel free to do so. I really hope that you guys leave having learned something and not feeling like, I didn't understand what he was saying. This talk is geared towards helping churches work with young people. So some of you who are parents, the information that I will give you will be helpful. But as we move towards what does this mean, I'll be talking more from a church context, if that's okay. But to be honest, every study right now shows that the primary discipler of any young person are their parents. So, and that's one of the things I'm going to say. The parents are the primary discipler. So, if that's the one thing you leave with today, that you are the primary discipler, not the church, then great, you can actually leave right now, go get a coffee, and then listen to what Amy says. So, but really, thank you guys for caring about your children, about your youth worker. That's amazing, and about the future of your church. So, okay, so I'm going to start. And actually, today's our generation are tomorrow's adults. Some church pastors would say to me, well, why do I have to change how I speak to my congregation today? The teenagers can just adapt to what we do. And what I tell him is if you're not going to change today, in about 5 years' time, you're going to be preaching to your entire congregation in a way that no one can understand. Because your older generation that had that discipline to sit down and listen to whatever you said is no longer going to be around. So, and just as an illustration, I'll tell you one story. A couple of years ago, I invited some young people to our church, and now I lead a church plant, but back then the mother church that I was an elder of, I asked some young people to come and help do something during the church service, and they weren't believers, but because they were going to be doing something on the front, they were sat towards the front of the church. And I thought it would be a good thing for the older people in the church to see some young people sitting at the front and help them to see, yes, young people can come into church. It's a good thing. And during the church service, during the sermon, some of these young people started to speak to each other. And I was not very happy with them because you shouldn't speak to each other during the sermon. Well, you can if you're on the balcony, no one can see you. But if you're in the first two pews, it's not a good thing to be speaking to each other. So I actually crawled to the front. And then I walked to the back. Okay, job well done. They'll sit down and they'll listen now. 2 minutes later, what do I see? The young people are talking to each other during the sermon. And now I started to get very frustrated with them because they're making me look bad. I've invited these young people into the church. There you go. That's how being honest. So I, again, tiptoed to the front. Okay, job done, go to the back. And they kept talking to each other. And I actually became a little bit frustrated because lack of respect, what's the image that they're showing, things like that. I had some issues that I had to work through there. But then God reminded me of a dream I'd had the night before. And the dream, without explaining what it was basically saying, the young people are doing something that you don't understand, but I'm at work here. So that was a whole other dream. So then I began to think, okay, God's at work here. I have no idea what he's doing, but he's at work. After the church service, I spoke to those young people and I asked them, what were you doing? Why were you speaking to each other during the sermon? And what do you think they told me? They were talking about the sermon. They were talking about the sermon. Isn't that a pastor's dream? They were engaged with what the pastor was saying and reacting to it right away. Some of those old people I had to creep past might have been asleep. They looked like they were doing the right thing, but the young people were talking about the sermon. And it made me think, when in their life do they have to sit down and listen to anybody for 25 minutes? When? Can you tell me?
School.
Nope, not in school, because teaching is interactive these days.
Not in our school.
Okay. In a lot of schools, the teaching is more interactive these days. It just doesn't happen in their lives, that they have to sit and listen, unless you're in Ukraine. In a Ukrainian church, the young people... Is anyone here from Ukraine? Okay, good job. You've trained your young people to still sit and listen. But in most of our churches, church is the only place where we expect young people to sit and listen. And so if we as pastors don't understand that we have to change how we communicate, we're going to lose our congregations. Maybe not this year, but in 10 years' time, when these teenagers are adults, if we can't communicate to them in a way that they can understand, it doesn't matter how good the message is. So that's just an illustration. Okay, I'm going to base a lot of what I'm going to say today when we respond to how do we work with young people today on this guy. And 1 John 2:6 says, whoever claims to live in him must walk as Jesus did. And I take that quite literally. When I'm thinking about how do I do youth work, I think, what did Jesus do? Not what would Jesus do, but what did Jesus do? Because most of the young people, or most of the disciples that Jesus had walking alongside him were young. And we can debate why I think that later on. I'm happy to share that. I'm not saying all of the disciples were young, but most of them were. And so as I think about how do I work with young people today, sometimes I look at what Jesus did. And we're going to be doing this together as an exercise. And that might give us some answers to how do we today work with young people. But I also like this guy here, Paul. Does anyone know which verse, which story this is? Anyone here a pastor? No.
He becomes everything to...
I become all things to all people. To the Jew I become like a Jew. To those under the law I become like under the law. So as to each those under the law. So what he doesn't say is I become these people, but I become like them. And in order to do that, he needs to study their culture. And we see when Paul went to Rome is a perfect example of how studying the culture can help you reach that culture well. When Paul went to Rome, was it Rome or Athens? Sorry, Athens. When Paul went to Athens, how did he start his talk to the Athenians? Do you remember? Huh? The unknown God. Okay, now what he could have done is said, you Athenians, you're worshipping the wrong God, you heathens. You've got lots of gods. That's wrong. There is only one God. You should follow him. If that had been his opening theologically correct sentence, how would the Athenians have responded? Badly, yes. So instead, what does he do? He says, men of Athens, I see that you are a religious people because as I walk through your city, I can see that you have got lots of different gods. Good for you. And I noticed that you have a statue to the unknown God. And let me tell you who that unknown God is. Oh, now they're listening. Now the rest of his sermon went exactly the same as it could have done had he started off by saying, you heathens, you are worshipping false gods. But because he understood their culture and started the conversation that way, he had an audience. And that's what we need to do with young people today. Understand their culture, and that will help us start conversations with them in a way that they can understand, which will then help us to have those gospel life-changing conversations with them. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So, culture changes. Generation X, people born from 1960 to 1980. Who here is from Generation X? Okay, there might be some people who are older than that. So, okay, we were the generation that kind of watched a lot of Friends in the West. That changed to Generation Y, who are mostly known millennials, and there's millennials today. Generation Y, anyone here from Generation Y? Okay, you guys? I know. You were the great generation. Okay, and now Generation Z is people born between 1996 and 2010. These are the young people that I spend most of my time studying. I study millennials a lot as well, but these are the ones I'm mostly interested in. But now there's a whole new generation coming up called the Alpha generation, which is a whole new thing. Now these guys, this is the first generation that do not know what it is not to live with a cell phone. So when my daughter, who was, now she's 9, when she was 7, she began to ask for a cell phone. She's like, Daddy, when can I have a cell phone? I told her, you can have a cell phone at the same age that I was when I got a cell phone. She's like, great, how old's that? 35. Well, I think I was 28. So but her classmate, she was the only person in her class that didn't have a cell phone, like an intelligent phone, at the age of 7. So these people grew up not knowing what it is not to have a cell phone. And actually, what I oftentimes would say is that this is the day the world changed. When Apple announced the unveiling of the iPhone. And this changed all of us in ways that we don't understand. All of us. All of us. Is there anyone here that does not have a phone? No? Back in the olden days, could you remember phone numbers? Can you remember any phone numbers these days? How many phone numbers do we know these days? I know 1, 2. Your own. Actually, my own I can only remember in Czech. I can't remember it in English. So, okay, what else has changed about cell phones? Like, what do you use your cell phone for these days?
Everything.
Everything. Okay, for example. Camera. Schedule. Ordering food. Emailing. Video conferences. Oh, you grown-up people. Explore. Okay, in schools, how do you think young people use cell phones? Snapchat. There you go. Yeah, nowadays, young people don't have to look for information. If it's not available on the net, it's not available to them. I used to go looking in encyclopedias for anything I wanted to find out about the world. For young people, it's there right away. And it's personalized. You guys know when you're on Facebook, and you're the Facebook generation, young people are not on Facebook so much anymore. Our generation love Facebook. What are the advertisements that come up on your Facebook feed?
What I like.
It's what you've searched for in Google, or whatever your search engine is. Now all of your Facebook advertising is tailored towards you. It's all about you. It's all about you. What do you want? What are you looking for? And this is what these young people have grown up with their whole lives. It's all about you. It's all about you. All right. Now, culture is changing. Young people are different today than they were 5 years ago, than they were 10 years ago, than they were 15 years ago. But in some ways, some things never change. The children now, they love luxury. They have bad manners. They have contempt for authority. And in your notes, that quote continues. Who do you think said that? Yeah, it was Aristotle. The oldest citing of that is in 1906. So, it might have been not written by Aristotle, but there is a citing from 1906 saying that Aristotle said it. So it's at least from 1906. So in some ways, young people are always the same. So the culture is changing a lot. But as we grow older, we always look at young people and say, oh, the young people, no respect for authority, no. People said that about you guys, don't you think? Whatever you're thinking about young people today, somebody was thinking about that, especially in church. So in some ways, things don't change. There's an interesting phenomena happening. It started happening between 5 and 7 years ago in America, is that parents were realizing their children don't go to parties the way they went to parties. Like back in the old, and actually teenagers no longer wanted to get driving licenses the way young people used to want to get. So Ryan, you're from America. How old were you when you got your driving license?
On my 16th birthday.
On your 16th birthday. I didn't know that for sure, but it was the right answer. Thank you very much. So back in my generation, your car was your freedom. It's how you could be with your friends. It's how you could have a life. Nowadays, in America, they've been noticing that young people are not eager to get their driving licenses because they can be with their friends on the phone. So they go home, close the room, in their door, and they're on the online community or their gaming community. The same thing with parties. There are a lot fewer parties happening in America nowadays than there were when my generation were teenagers. And those parties that do happen generally are organized by parents that are saying, I need my young person to interact with other young people because they're always on the screen. So that is a true phenomena. However, what is now happening is that studies are showing that young people are realizing it is unhealthy for them. And they are self-identifying that an hour of FaceTime on a social media device raises my happiness level, an hour. But after the hour, actually that happiness level goes down. And this is a really interesting quirk of what's happening with the I generation, is that they are beginning to realize that the phone is not how they want to build relationships. They are beginning to realize they actually want to have human interaction, but here's the problem. They don't know how.
They don't have the driving license.
They don't have their driving licenses. No, but actually what's happening, because they've been raised on phones, because parents, their primary form of babysitting in many cases was to give their child the iPad. That is their human interaction with a device. And so young people today, outside of the church context, inside the church is slightly different, but outside of the church context, they actually don't know how to physically create friendships. They don't know how to physically communicate with people. So this last one here, self-expression through emojis rather than NVC. This is something that my wife has noticed. She's a high school teacher. And my wife will show a facial expression to her teenagers and say, what am I feeling? And the teenagers, and I can't believe this, but they physically can't tell her. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you angry? They can no longer gain, like when I was in school, when the teenager was angry, I knew the teenager was angry. I just looked at the face. When the teacher was happy, I knew the teacher was happy. I looked at the face. It's not always taken for granted anymore. Young people cannot read your facial cues the way we could. But what they can read is emojis. Because that's how they communicate. That's how they communicate. So actually, how does this transfer to today? When you're giving a talk to young people, and they look like they are bored to death. You're giving a talk, and they're like, what do you as the speaker feel? You feel like, oh no, they're bored to death. Like, this is terrible. What am I going to do? Because in my generation, if I was looking like this to the speaker, then I was bored to death. But actually what's happening is that young people do not show emotion here the way we used to. So they can look like they're bored to death, but actually inside they can be quite happy. And if you ask them to send an emoji about how they're feeling, you get lots of happy emojis. So it's an interesting phenomenon. And it gives me hope when I'm giving a talk to a group of teenagers that look like they're bored to death, that actually they might not be. But if you guys start looking bored to death, then I will be a bit worried. So that's just an interesting phenomena. Now let me ask you this. All those things that you've just spoken about, does that give you hope? Does it make you feel hope or hopeless? Hopeless. Thank you, Fraser. Hopeless. Come on, let's be honest. Who feels a bit hopeless when thinking about teenagers today? Yeah. Now I'm going to be really honest with you. When we're talking about millennials, I feel a little bit hopeless. And I work alongside and with millennials too. But when I think about I generation, and generally, I think that Europeans are about 3 or 4 years behind Americans when these changes happen. I'm actually filled with quite a lot of hope. And I'll explain why. By the way, these are some of the things that pop up a lot in studies these days. Young people are gender fluid. And in your churches, you are going to come across homosexuality. Oh, that's 5 years ago. Gender identity is the new thing that you guys are going to have to wrestle with in your churches. How do you deal with someone that's a boy that identifies as a girl? And vice versa. That is an issue that you are going to have to learn to wrestle with, and it's going to hit you like a truck if you haven't dealt with it yet. Because even your Christian teenagers are bombarded with these issues, and your Christian teenagers are bombarded with a truth from the world, which is not the truth found in the Bible. So you will have to wrestle with this sooner or later. Social media, we know this. Videos, my generation, we watch TV. Young people today, they watch YouTube. And my generation, we like rock stars. Young people today, vloggers are the new rock star. Who doesn't know what a vlogger is? Okay, so we all know. Who doesn't know the names of any vloggers? Now all of us put our hands up. So vloggers are the new rock stars. Today, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow? This is an interesting thing. Young people today are very entrepreneurial. Look at that. If it didn't happen on social media, it didn't happen. That's another interesting thing that's happening. If it's not on social media, it didn't happen. There's an interesting one. Okay, but here's an interesting thing. People are saying that I generation, they are generation we, not generation me. Millennials tended to be more focused on themselves. Teenagers today have this concept of a greater good, and they want to be engaged for the greater good. And I'm really hopeful, actually, that this generation of young people are going to do some amazing things. I think there's a lot of good waiting for us, but there are some challenges too. By the way, when we talk about media, social media, this is from 2 years ago. If you look here, this is Facebook, and there's an arrow pointing downwards. So yes, Facebook is on its way out, but it is still the #1 media platform for young people, but they don't use it the way we use it. Facebook, for me, is my main primary social interaction platform. For young people, Facebook has become a web page. Does that make sense? And their primary interaction platform is now Instagram. You can see that the arrow started going up 2 years ago. Instagram is where most of our young people are today, interacting with each other. There's also Snapchat and other things like that, but Instagram is becoming the new thing. But Facebook is still a valid way of interacting with some people. Ryan, you're putting a face. I don't know if you agree with me or not. Oh, okay, there you go. So I would say don't give up on Facebook just yet. But if you want to be interacting with young people on a daily basis, open an Instagram account. So young people today, they want to be known. They really do. They want to be known. They want to be known. That's really important. And they are willing to listen. Young people are willing to listen to your story. They're looking for truth in this world. They want to know what your truth is. They want to know what his truth is as well. But if you want to share the reason for the hope that you have, and you've built a relationship with those young people, they will listen to you. They will listen to you. They are open to the gospel. They're also open to the Quran and lots of other things as well, but they are open to the gospel. And actually, they want an impact on society, and they're willing to serve. They don't want to be passive participants. They want to be active engagers. So what's the challenge for us? The challenge for us then is, if they want to be known, get to know them, but show them their identity. Give them an identity. Who does Christ see you as being? Don't listen to the media, who the media says you are. Who does Christ say you are? And who does Christ say young people is? Who are young people for Jesus? They are accepted, precious. His children, his sons and daughters, they are loved. Okay? That's a really special message that a lot of young people are not getting in their schools. They are not getting at home. You are loved. You are precious. You are special. Now, millennials, they knew that. I am special. The I generation, they don't know that about themselves. But if we tell them that, that's a message that they want and need to hear. Something else. Young people are willing to listen to our stories. And so we need to be willing to share those stories. And we need to teach ourselves as churches to share those stories in the ways that young people can listen to. Because they will listen. So we need to equip our members to share the stories. And the other thing, young people want to serve, so we need to give them an opportunity for impact. There's a church in Estonia that I've worked alongside. After their church service, I was, how is it in your churches? In my previous church, after church, the old people sat here, the young people sat here, the parents were looking for their children, the college students were sat here, and there was no mixing. Whereas this church in Estonia, after church, everyone was talking to each other. Everyone. And I asked, how did this happen? And they said, actually, a few years ago, we decided to make multi-generational teams. We don't do anything as a church with a mono-generational team anymore. So on our Alpha team, we've got a 14-year-old serving alongside a 60-year-old. That's a really interesting thing. And actually, there's a much wider impact that church has now had. But it created a great sense of community. A great sense of community. And it empowered those young people. Those young people in that church are taught, it doesn't matter that you're 14 years old. You can be on a team organizing a big event for our church. We'll empower you to do that. And studies from America, I'll talk about that in a bit, are showing that teenagers knowing that they can have an impact is a really important part of young people staying in a church. It's a really important part of young people staying in a church. Okay. Here's a question that teenagers ask. Why should I listen to you? Do you care about me? Why is this message relevant to me? Why should I listen to you? Do you care about me? Why is this message relevant to me? Young people will communicate on social media what they don't communicate in person. Does that make sense? So actually, I mean, that's when I first started doing these seminars 10 years ago, I would say to youth workers, Facebook is your friend. Because on Facebook, you will learn so much more about your young people than they will ever tell you face to face. You will know what they did on Monday, you'll know what they did on Tuesday, you'll know what they did on Wednesday. You know how they felt about what they did on Wednesday. You'll know what happened on Thursday morning. You will know all these things about your young people because they will put it on Facebook. That was 10 years ago. And so what I used to do is if I knew I was going to meet with some young people, I would just stalk them on Facebook. I would work out what happened for a week in their lives on Facebook. And then when I met them one-on-one, I'd be like, so, how was that event on Monday? It gave us something to speak about right away. And they knew that I was interested in their lives because I knew that they did something on Monday. It gets a bit creepy if you don't know them and you say that. Then you're a stalker. But Facebook and social media does give us a way of getting to know young people better. And it is true that young people are more willing to express themselves on social media than they do face-to-face initially. Because, and I said it earlier, they've lost the skill of communicating face-to-face. They were raised on the screens. But from my experience, as we get to know young people and draw them into a relationship, it does become easier for them to open up in person. But social media is how I stalk the young people. It's how I find out what's really happening in their lives. And then I use that to have a face-to-face conversation. Does that make sense? So that's not to say you should spy on your children if you have younger children, but it is a tool that we can use. So I'm going to say some other things. So be where they are. I said that already. Spend time with them. Spend time with young people. I've said that already. Get to know them and their network. Get to know them and their network. So young people today, generally their network is 4 to 6 people. 4 to 6 people. And if a young person becomes a part of your church community, you can use that into a bridge into their community. But here's something that's really interesting about their community. Who here does camps for young people with their churches? Anyone do camps? Or any kind of outreach? So here's what sometimes happens. A church puts a lot of effort into doing a summer camp. And they share the gospel during that camp. And yes, 10 people put their hands up and accept Christ as their Lord and Savior. That is amazing. And then the church says, okay, we've got this great youth program that is starting in September. Because right now we're all going on vacation. And then in September, they send an email to everyone saying, hey, remember the camp? Come back to camp. You're starting right now. And most of those young people, they are gone. They are gone. They do not come back and re-engage with your church. And the reason why is because they left their social circle to be at your camp. And at your camp, they became a part of a new social circle. And then when you abandoned them after camp, they went back to their old social circle. Does that make sense? And so if you're doing any kind of outreach event for young people, the follow-up is more important than the event. And the follow-up must be immediately after the event. And it must be personal. Fraser, let's meet this week. I'm not going to invite you to some bigger event. I'm going to say, let's you and me meet this week. So what happens is that you've got young people are leaving their social circle to come to your event. They're creating a new social circle. And then when they go home, they're going to their old social circle, but you're keeping your social circle as a part of their lives too. So now they've got 2 social circles. Does that make sense? If you do not contact the young people immediately after the event, you've lost them. Okay, do not wait till September and expect that they're going to turn up to your event. 10 years ago, it worked. 10 years ago, they would have turned up to your event. Nowadays, you've got to keep socially engaged with young people. And that follow-up needs to be immediate and personal. And I'm going to say one more thing. Sometimes when you invite a young person to an event, that's a week away. It's a week away. Now for me, it's like 7 days. For young people, it's eternity. So they will tell you, yeah, I'll be there, but they might not be there because it's a week away. And they make decisions based on feelings. So they might, even that morning, intend to go to your event, but that afternoon get invited somewhere else. Oh, that's normal. It happened in my life too. But a week away is a long, long time away. It's much better if I want to meet with a young person, rather than saying to that young person, can I meet you next week? I wait for the day before, and I say, can I meet you tomorrow? Tomorrow is doable for a young person. A week away, it's a long, long time. Be open and honest. And this is true of all generations. The more open you are with them, the more open they'll be with you. It's important. That's how you build relationships with anybody. Be welcoming. Oh, if a young person comes to your church, don't make them feel like this. How many people, well, is it possible that this could happen in your church? It could happen. It's happened in my church that a young person comes for the first time and they don't behave quite the right way, and the reaction of some of our older people is quite strong. It's a shame. It's a shame. So we need to educate our older people as well in how to reach out to young people. And I think older people have a wonderful role to play in the lives of young people, but they need to hear that. And they for sure need to hear when someone walks into our church building for the first time wearing the wrong t-shirt, that is not the thing to talk about. My church, the church that I currently lead, our music is not that good. Our sermons are not that good. Our production values are not that good. We actually don't have lights. Sometimes there's feedback on the speaker. Sometimes things go wrong. But young people come back time and time again because someone takes an interest in them and speaks to them. And it doesn't matter what they're wearing. Someone will speak to them. That's how you get young people engaged and involved in your local church. Get to know them first, and then share with them the message that you have to share with them. And young people need the gospel. They need the gospel so much. We all need it. And the gospel message of Jesus is transformative in the lives of young people today. Now, there's a lot more I could say, but the 5-minute warning has been given. So I'm going to end on just one story. Yesterday, in my church, we baptized 6 people. So it was a great thing. So I left Whistler, I went back to the Czech Republic, baptized 6 people. It was a great success. They all said, I believe. No one drowned. So, and they were 3 young people and 3 older people who got baptized. They all had to share their story. How did it come to be that you want to be baptized? The interesting thing about every single story was this. Every single story involved a person. A person invited me here. A person told me. There was a relationship. One of the girls specifically said, I was an outcast in my school. I had no friends. I didn't think I'd ever have friends. And then somehow my parents sent me to this day camp, and the people there cared. The people there cared. The first time in my life, I felt accepted. Now, the other interesting thing about all of the stories, every single one of those stories, I was searching for something, but I didn't know what. I was searching for something, but I didn't know what. And they for sure didn't think they would find it in the church. In fact, 2 of the adults, had said that they had gone to Catholic churches when they were teenagers because their grandmothers took them. And that turned them off church forever. Christianity is not the way. I've tried it. I was searching for something, but I didn't know what, and somebody came alongside me and showed me the way. Okay? I believe that young people today are open to the gospel. I believe it with all my heart, but we need to share the gospel with them in a way that they can understand, and that takes relationship, and it takes a communication skill on our side to explain things in a way that they can understand. Does that make sense? And that for sure also means for our churches, we need to equip our preachers to communicate in a way that young people can understand, which means it needs to be short. Some of you guys are falling asleep right now, and I'm sorry for that. And I've been fairly interactive in the way I speak. It doesn't always happen from our church pulpits. And so when those young people are speaking, that's a good thing, because at least they're engaged with what they're hearing. So all of those people were searching for truth. They didn't think they'd find it in a church, but someone took time to develop a relationship with them. And as a result of that, they all ended up getting baptized yesterday. Now, the final thing I would say, I do spend a lot of time working with adults right now. And so I have another ministry that reaches people from 16 to 70. That's one of my passions right now. And the thing about reaching adults is that it's youth work with alcohol. That's actually what I found. That might be not a good thing for some of you to hear. But every single thing that works for young people, I believe works with adults. You just have to add your context of beer in the Czech Republic, wine in Italy, nothing in Egypt. But people our age and older, they want to be known. They want someone to speak identity into their lives. They are searching for community. Many of them are successful. They've got the jobs they wanted. They've got the wives they wanted. They've kind of got the kids they wanted. And they're still searching. They're not fulfilled. And so they are searching for truth, and the church is not the place they think they're going to find it, because we are not reaching out to any people in our older generations too. But like I said, yesterday we baptized 6 people, 3 teenagers, 3 people who are above the age of 40. I think all generations are searching for truth. If you can learn to reach young people, you can for sure learn to reach other generations as well. Okay, thank you very much.